I never thought the day would come when my own father would drag me across the marble floor of our family estate by my hair, the chandelier light above blurring as tears mixed with blood on my forehead. And all because I dared to resist when my $10 million inheritance was handed to my brother like a trophy for existing. My name is Rebecca Johnson. I am 42 years old, and this is the story of how my parents tried to erase me from the legacy my grandfather built with his bare hands. A legacy I was raised to continue, a legacy they believed I was too strong, too independent, too threatening to hold. I can still hear the coldness in my father's voice, the way it echoed through the grand hall as he hissed that I was no longer part of this family, while my mother watched with folded arms and my brother Michael smirked like a child who had just stolen a cookie and been applauded for it. I had given decades of my life to the company, to the Johnson name, but in one brutal instant, I was cast out, discarded like trash, humiliated in front of the people who were supposed to protect me. My hair tangled in his fist, my knees scraping against the polished floor, and Michael's mocking laugh cutting into me deeper than the physical pain. It was the moment my heart broke and hardened at the same time. I wanted to scream, to claw my way back inside, but I knew then that begging would only feed their cruelty. Instead, I rose from the ground outside those gates with dirt on my palms and rage in my chest, and I swore aloud under the darkening sky that they would regret every second of this betrayal. The inheritance they thought they had stolen was not just money or property, it was my identity, my bond with my grandfather, my place in a world I had built with diligence and sacrifice. They wanted me, powerless, humiliated, erased. What they created instead was a woman with nothing left to lose, a woman willing to fight with intelligence, with evidence, with the very truth they had tried to bury. They thought dragging me out by my hair was the end. They were wrong. It was only the beginning. I grew up in a world of glass towers, gated estates, and boardrooms that smelled of polished oak and old cigars, but behind the glossy surface was a family that thrived on control, manipulation, and favoritism so blatant it carved scars into me long before fists or hair pulling ever did. My grandfather, Henry Johnson, the man who built Johnson Properties from a single construction crew into a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions, was the only one who ever looked at me and saw more than just a daughter who could be married off or silenced. From the time I was 12, he would take me to his office place contracts in front of me and ask me what I saw. At first, I only saw numbers, but he would smile and push me until I saw patterns, risks, opportunities. He used to say, "Rebecca, leadership is not about who shouts the loudest, it is about who sees the farthest." Those words stayed with me. He taught me how to hold a fishing rod at the lake by our country house, and while we waited for the line to twitch, he would talk about leverage, loyalty, and legacy. I was his shadow in meetings, his right hand in strategy, and even when I was a child, he told the board, "She understands this business better than any of you." That bond with him was what fueled my rise, but it also fueled the jealousy festering in my father Charles and my mother Patricia. Charles, my father, was the company's CFO, a man more obsessed with appearances and power than with integrity. He resented the fact that his own father-in-law trusted me, a young woman, more than him. He would sneer when Henry praised me and mutter that girls should focus on family, not balance sheets. Patricia, my mother, wore pearls and judgment like a second skin. She adored my younger brother Michael as if he were a crown prince, excusing every failure, rewarding every reckless act, showering him with the kind of affection she never wasted on me. Michael was 4 years younger, spoiled, reckless, addicted to the thrill of money he never earned. When he crashed cars, my parents bought him new ones. When he opened bars that failed within months, they bailed him out. When he was arrested for DUI, my father paid off the officers and spun the story until it vanished from the press. And still, every dinner, every family gathering, they would look at me and say, "Rebecca, you are too serious, too cold, too controlling." But I was not cold. I was determined. At 25, I graduated from Wharton and returned home, stepping into the COO position with a fire that could not be dimmed. I expanded our reach into Texas, grew revenue 30% in 2 years, and negotiated contracts that seasoned executives twice my age had failed to close. My grandfather beamed with pride, but my father seethed. He would gaslight me in board meetings, undermining every word I spoke, pretending not to understand figures I had verified, only to later present them as his own. At home, Patricia whispered venom into my ears. No matter what you do, you'll never be the favorite. And Michael, drunk on entitlement, smirked across the dinner table as if he already knew the crown would fall into his lap without lifting a finger. Still, I clung to my grandfather's faith. He assured me again and again that when his time came, I would inherit the company, the wealth, the responsibility. He told me that strength and foresight were my birthright, not Michael's carelessness. For a while, I believed that merit and loyalty would be enough, but I did not yet understand the depth of envy in my father's eyes, or the cruelty that would soon be unleashed the moment my grandfather drew his last breath. By the time I was 30, the cracks in the polished facade of our family dinners had widened into canyons. What once passed for subtle digs became open hostility. My father, Charles, took every opportunity to question me in front of others, turning board meetings into interrogations, designed not to clarify numbers but to belittle me. He would flip through my reports with a bored expression and say things like, "Rebecca, are you sure these figures aren't inflated as if I were careless or deceitful?" When the board later confirmed my numbers were accurate, he would smile thinly and claim he simply wanted to ensure due diligence. The damage, of course, was already done, the seed of doubt planted in their minds. At-home dinner became another battlefield. Patricia, ever the queen of appearances, would set the table with fine china and crystal glasses, but her words cut sharper than knives. She would point at Michael, dressed in a suit I knew he hadn't paid for, and gush about how charming he was, how people adored his charisma. Then she would turn to me with a sigh and remark, "Rebecca, maybe if you smiled, more people would like you better." Across the table, Michael smirked, swirling a glass of wine he hadn't earned, basking in the glow of unearned praise. He was already sinking money into another doomed nightclub, already borrowing against the family's name to fund his recklessness. But somehow he was still their darling, still their golden boy. The more I achieved, the more they twisted the narrative. When I negotiated a multi-million-dollar deal in Texas, expanding our company's footprint, my father accused me of overextending resources. When profits soared 30%, Patricia muttered that I was too obsessed with work to ever find a husband. And when I spent nights at the hospital with my grandfather during one of his early health scares, Michael sneered that I was only sucking up to the old man. It was gaslighting at its finest. No matter what I did, it was wrong, cold, selfish. The tension escalated further the night my grandfather gathered the family for a dinner at the estate. His voice, though weakened by age, still commanded attention. He looked at me with pride, then at the board members seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, and announced that I would be CEO after him. The room went still. I saw my father's jaw clench, his fingers tightening around the stem of his glass until I thought it might shatter. My mother's smile froze, the kind that hides venom behind pearls. Michael's face reddened, and for a moment I thought he might slam his fist against the table. Instead, he leaned back, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a growl, muttering under his breath that this wasn't over. From that night on, the hostility became unbearable. My father stopped pretending to support me in front of outsiders. He began calling me controlling, accusing me of alienating partners. He suggested to the board that perhaps I was too young, too inflexible, too much like Henry. At home, my mother grew bolder, whispering in my ear during family gatherings that I was too arrogant, that nobody wanted me there. Michael escalated his mockery into open threats, telling me one night after too many drinks that when he took over, I'd be lucky if he let me manage janitorial staff. Still, I held my ground. I had my grandfather's trust, my track record, my vision. But the poison was spreading and I could feel the walls closing in. Each success of mine became another excuse for them to undermine me. Each failure of Michael's became another problem they forced me to clean up. The weight of their manipulation pressed on my chest, and yet I told myself I could endure it. I believed blood ties would hold, that my father and mother, no matter how cruel, would not go so far as to rip everything away. I was wrong. Their resentment had curdled into something darker, something I would only fully recognize when my grandfather lay dying and the vultures began to circle, sharpening their knives, not just for my inheritance, but for my dignity, my place, my very identity. The winter my grandfather's health collapsed was the winter everything I thought I could trust disintegrated. He had been frail for months, but it was a sudden stroke that sent him to the hospital, and from there, the diagnosis of advanced cancer followed like a death sentence already signed. I moved into the sterile white corridors of the oncology ward, barely leaving his side, managing the company from a laptop balanced on my knees, whispering updates into his ear as he drifted in and out of sleep. He squeezed my hand once and whispered, "Rebecca, the company is yours. Never forget that." His voice was faint but steady, and those words burned into me like a final vow. In those nights he called me his partner, not just his granddaughter. We would talk about the fishing lake where we used to spend hours about the old copy of The Art of War we read together about legacy. One evening he asked me to open the drawer of his bedside table. Inside was a small wooden box, polished but simple. He pushed it toward me with trembling fingers and said, "If things go wrong, the truth is here." I wanted to ask what he meant, but his eyes closed and the words dissolved into silence. That box would haunt me in the days to come. Then came the interference. Charles, my father, started taking control of hospital visits. He insisted the company needed stability, that my presence at the hospital was a distraction. When I refused to leave, he whispered threats in my ear. He told nurses I was emotional and disruptive. Soon, I found restrictions on visiting hours suddenly applied to me, but not to him or Patricia. I would arrive only to be told my grandfather was too tired for visitors, though I knew Michael had just left after a long stay. The isolation was deliberate. They were cutting me off from the man who had promised me everything. The day my grandfather died, I was not in the room. My father called me only after the machines had been switched off. His tone was clipped businesslike, as if announcing a quarterly loss. "He's gone, Rebecca. Come to the estate. We're reading the will tonight." My chest tightened with grief, but beneath it ran a current of dread. The way he said it, sharp, decisive, made me feel as if the decision had already been made, the verdict sealed. That evening, the family gathered in the grand hall of the Johnson estate. The chandeliers glittered coldly above us, their light bouncing off marble floors. The lawyer present was not Daniel Harris, my grandfather's trusted advisor for decades, but a younger man I barely knew. A man my father introduced as our family's counsel. He opened a leather folder, his voice measured, and began to read. My heart pounded as he listed assets, accounts, properties. Then came the knife, all of it, every dollar, every share, every property was to go to Michael Johnson. My name was not attached to the inheritance. Instead, he read a single line. "To Rebecca, I leave this letter." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Michael leaned back, smirking, as though the crown had been lowered onto his head. My father watched me with a predator's gaze, as if savoring my devastation. My hands trembled as I clutched the envelope given to me, my breath caught between disbelief and rage. This had to be wrong, fraudulent. My grandfather would never disinherit me, not after everything he promised, not after the years he spent grooming me for leadership. I stood, my voice shaking but fierce. "This is fraudulent. This is not his will." My father's response was ice. "Sit down, Rebecca. Your grandfather finally realized who really deserves it." Michael chuckled, leaning forward to meet my eyes. "Guess who's the real heir now, sis?" The words sliced through me like a blade. I tore open the letter with frantic fingers, hoping for clarity, for explanation. Inside was a single page in my grandfather's handwriting. "Remember our fishing spot. The book we shared. Trust Daniel." My pulse raced. The fishing spot. The old book. Daniel Harris. This was not the end. This was a clue. But at that moment, standing in the hall with my family's eyes on me, I was drowning in humiliation. My mother's voice carried across the marble as she added, "Don't embarrass yourself further, Rebecca. You should be grateful we thought of you at all." The cruelty in her tone was unbearable. My father motioned to the guards at the door. "She doesn't belong here anymore." I clutched the letters to my chest, my only anchor in a sea of betrayal. Around me, the empire I had helped build was slipping from my hands, stolen by the people who should have been my protectors. My grandfather's body wasn't even in the ground yet, and already they had carved me out of his legacy. But even as the humiliation burned in my veins, I held on to the words in that letter. "Remember, Trust Daniel. Somewhere in the ashes of this betrayal was a spark of hope, and I swore to myself I would find it. The morning after the will reading, I returned to Johnson Properties headquarters, clinging to routine as if work could shield me from grief. I had led the company as COO for over a decade, sat in that corner office through triumphs and storms, and I believed foolishly that my role was untouchable. But the moment I stepped into the lobby, security guards blocked my path. Their eyes darted nervously as one of them cleared his throat and said, "Orders from the top, Ms. Johnson. You're no longer authorized to enter." My chest tightened. I demanded to see the board to see my father, but instead, Charles himself descended the marble staircase, his voice carrying across the atrium like a gavel. "As interim CEO, I am terminating your position effective immediately. Clear your office. You have 30 minutes. The staff froze. Some looked away, others whispered, but none dared to intervene. I walked to my office with my head high, even as humiliation burned hot on my cheeks. Inside, I packed the photographs of me with my grandfather, the framed contracts I had negotiated, the pins he had given me when I signed my first deal. As I reached for the leather-bound copy of The Art of War he once pressed into my hands, Michael barged in, flanked by 2 assistants. He smirked, tossing my grandfather's gold pin in the air like a toy. "This is mine now. All of it. You should thank me for letting you take your little memories." I clutched the book to my chest, trembling with rage. "You don't deserve any of this." His laugh was sharp. "Deserve? That's not how this family works. Dad made it clear this empire is mine. You were just keeping the seat warm." He yanked a photo of me and my grandfather from my box, ripped it in half, and dropped it at my feet. My hands itched to strike him, but I forced myself still. He wanted me to break. As I left the building carrying my box, employees avoided my eyes. Some whispered apologies as I passed, but none dared defy Charles's wrath. When I reached the estate later that night, determined to retrieve the last of my belongings, the real humiliation began. Patricia stood in the foyer with arms folded, pearls gleaming against her throat, her voice dripping with disdain. "You should leave quietly, Rebecca. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I ignored her, moving toward the staircase, but Michael appeared at the landing holding my jewelry box like a prize. "Looking for this," he taunted. Rage coursed through me as I rushed forward, but before I could reach him, my father's footsteps thundered across the marble. His face was a mask of fury, veins bulging at his temples. "I told you you're finished here," he bellowed. In an instant, his hand tangled in my hair, yanking so hard my scalp seared with pain. I screamed, clawing at his grip, but he dragged me across the foyer as my mother watched in silence, and Michael laughed. "Stop! You're hurting me," I gasped, but Charles's grip only tightened. He hauled me toward the door, my knees scraping against the polished stone, my cries echoing through the cavernous hall. Patricia's voice cut through the air cold and precise. "Don't embarrass us in front of the staff." That single sentence, spoken as I writhed in agony, pierced me deeper than my father's hand in my hair. To her, my pain was nothing but an inconvenience, an ugly spectacle to be erased. When the doors swung open, cold night air slapped my face. Charles shoved me outside, releasing me so violently I stumbled and crashed against the stone steps. My palms split open on the rough surface, warm blood mingling with dirt. My hair clung to my tear-streaked cheeks. Above me, Michael leaned against the railing, his smirk etched in triumph. "You're not family anymore," he called down, his voice dripping with mockery. I pushed myself to my feet, trembling, broken, but not defeated. My chest heaved with the weight of betrayal, but inside burned something stronger. Rage forged into resolve. I stared up at them, my voice hoarse but steady. "This isn't over. You will regret this." The heavy door slammed shut, sealing me out of the life I had built, the family I had sacrificed for. For a moment, silence engulfed me, broken only by the pounding of my heart. The humiliation was complete, cast out like a criminal from my own home, stripped of my career, my dignity, my inheritance. But clutched in my fist beneath the blood and dirt was the letter my grandfather had left me. His words echoed in my mind. "Remember our fishing spot. Trust Daniel." They thought they had destroyed me, but in that moment of utter defeat, I realized they had given me something far more dangerous. Nothing left to lose and a map to the truth they had tried to bury. That night, as I sat in the small apartment I had rented years ago as an escape from the suffocating estate, I unwrapped the envelope again with shaking hands. The letter inside was brief, no more than a few lines in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Remember our fishing spot. The book we shared. Trust Daniel. The words were simple, yet they pulsed with urgency, a breadcrumb trail left in the midst of betrayal. The fishing spot. My heart tugged at the memory. A quiet lake on the edge of our country property where my grandfather and I had spent countless afternoons with rods in our hands, not because we cared about catching fish, but because it was where he taught me lessons no classroom could hold. He had a way of hiding meaning in simple things, how to wait, how to watch, how to pull at the right moment. It was there that he had once told me that a leader must see traps before anyone else does. Could he have hidden something for me there? The book we shared. My mind immediately flashed to the worn leather-bound copy of The Art of War that still rested in the box I managed to carry out of my office. Grandfather and I had annotated its pages together, filling the margins with strategies inside jokes lessons only we understood. Maybe the book wasn't just sentimental. Maybe it was a vessel for something more, a cipher or a key. I opened it that night, flipping through pages until my eyes caught on a folded scrap tucked deep in the spine. My breath caught. Inside was a safety deposit box number scrawled in Henry's hand. My pulse hammered in my ears. The truth wasn't gone. It was waiting. And then the third line, trust Daniel. My chest ached with relief. Daniel Harris was my grandfather's personal attorney, a man of integrity I had known since childhood, the one who gave me advice at 15 when I drafted my first business proposal for school. I hadn't seen him at the will reading, which already screamed manipulation. If anyone could confirm what my grandfather truly wanted, it was Daniel. I knew then that my father had staged everything cutting Daniel out to replace him with a pliant puppet who would read whatever false papers Charles had forced my grandfather to sign in his final days. The humiliation of being dragged across the marble floor still burned on my skin, but as I pieced the clues together, the fire inside me grew hotter than the shame. I wasn't powerless. I had a trail. I had a map. My father wanted me erased, but my grandfather had left me armed. They thought they had silenced me, but in reality, they had just pushed me closer to the truth. The next morning, I drove to Daniel's modest office downtown. He rose to greet me, his face lined with grief. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I wanted to be there, but they barred me." His words confirmed everything. I placed the letter and the book on his desk, my voice trembling. "He left me this. Please tell me what you know." Daniel leaned back, his eyes heavy, and finally nodded. "Your grandfather drafted a will years ago, leaving everything to you. He knew you were the only one fit to lead. But Charles intercepted me, replaced the documents, and when your grandfather was too weak to fight, he forced him to sign under duress. I still have a copy of the original. I was waiting for you." For a moment, tears blurred my vision. Proof existed. I wasn't insane. I wasn't the cold, controlling woman my parents painted me to be. I was the rightful heir, and I had allies. Daniel opened his drawer and slid out a small flash drive. "There's more," he said. "Henry recorded a conversation. He knew Charles would try to destroy you. He wanted you to have this." I clutched the drive in my palm, feeling the weight of it. Somewhere on this device was my father's corruption, his threats, his betrayal. For the first time since the will reading, I allowed myself a small, defiant smile. They had dragged me out by my hair, but I had walked straight into the path my grandfather had carved for me. This was no longer about survival. This was about war. Daniel slid the flash drive across the desk with a kind of solemn reverence, as if it were a relic. My hands shook as I picked it up, the small piece of metal heavier than 100 boardroom binders. He gestured toward his computer. "Play it. You need to hear it for yourself." The recording crackled to life with the sound of my grandfather's weary voice. "Charles, why are you doing this?" he asked, his tone ragged but steady. Then came my father's voice, cold and sharp, like a blade pressed against skin. "Sign this will or I'll bury her. I'll leak numbers, fabricate scandals, drag Rebecca through the mud until she's unemployable. You think the board will protect her. They'll destroy her reputation. And when they do, She'll have nothing. Sign or watch your precious heir turn into a pariah. My chest tightened as I heard Henry whisper, "She's the only one fit to lead, and you know it." The file ended with silence, but in that silence, I heard everything: my father's threats, my grandfather's resistance, the crime that stole my future. Daniel's eyes were heavy. "This proves coercion. Combined with the original will, it's undeniable. But Rebecca, they'll come for you if they know you have this." I nodded, already resolved. "Then we make sure the truth comes out where they can't bury it." That night, I drove to the lake where Henry and I once fished. The winter air bit at my skin as I trudged down the muddy path to the hollow oak tree we used as a landmark. My fingers dug through the damp earth at its roots until I struck metal. A small tin box, rusted at the edges, emerged from the soil. Inside was a brass key labeled with a bank's name and numbers that matched the slip hidden in the art of war. My breath caught. My grandfather had hidden the key to a safety deposit box here, as if he knew exactly how far Charles would go. The next morning, I visited the bank. The clerk checked my ID, glanced at the key, and led me to a private room. My hands trembled as I turned the lock. Inside the box lay a sealed envelope thick with papers. I tore it open and found the original will, signed and notarized, leaving everything: company shares, real estate, cash reserves to me. Alongside it were documents detailing financial transfers Charles had made to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, proof of embezzlement stretching back a decade. My stomach churned as I read page after page of fraud. The man who had dragged me by my hair had also been bleeding the company dry. I carried the documents back to Daniel's office, my chest tight with both dread and triumph. We spread them across his desk, our eyes scanning the damning evidence. "This is enough to destroy him," Daniel murmured. "But it's not enough to restore you. We'll need the board. We'll need regulators. This has to be public." At that moment, Julia, my grandfather's longtime secretary, stepped into the office. She had been loyal to Henry for 30 years, and when she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Rebecca," she whispered, pulling me into an embrace. "I was waiting for you. I knew he wouldn't leave you with nothing." Julia revealed that she had copies of internal memos Henry had drafted, including notes about his conversations with Charles. One in his own handwriting read, "Charles is trying to break Rebecca. He cannot be trusted with the company. Must protect her." I clutched the paper, my throat tightening. My grandfather had fought for me until his last breath. The three of us, Daniel, Julia, and I, formed a war council that night. We sat around Daniel's table, stacks of files and laptops open, mapping out every piece of evidence like generals planning a siege. Julia provided board contacts who were sympathetic but afraid of Charles's wrath. Daniel drafted a legal strategy that would invalidate the fraudulent will and reinstate the original. And I, battered but unbroken, outlined how we could present everything in one decisive strike at the next board meeting. Still, I knew the danger was real. Charles had resources, allies, and no conscience, and he was watching me. The next week, as I left Daniel's office late at night, 2 uniformed officers approached me on the sidewalk. "Rebecca Johnson," one asked sharply. "You're under investigation for theft of corporate property." My pulse spiked. They tried to cuff me, but Daniel stormed out just in time, brandishing legal documents. "You have no grounds," he barked. "Back off before you end up sued for harassment." The officers exchanged looks and retreated, but I understood the message. Charles knew I was moving against him, and he would use every weapon to crush me. Instead of fear, a strange calm washed over me. He had already taken everything from me: my inheritance, my position, my dignity. What more could he take? If he thought intimidation would break me, he had forgotten one thing. My grandfather taught me that when a cornered enemy pushes you, don't back down, you push harder. Back at my apartment, I laid out the artifacts of this battle: the flash drive with my father's threats, the original will, the embezzlement documents, my grandfather's handwritten notes. I looked at them and saw not just evidence, but weapons. Weapons sharpened by betrayal, ready to cut through lies. They had dragged me out by my hair, reduced me to nothing in front of their polished floors and smug smiles. But in their arrogance, they had left a trail of their own corruption, and I had followed it to the truth. Now it was time to strike back. I thought I had gained ground, but Charles was always watching. always one step behind with the resources of a predator who had lived his life manipulating systems to his advantage. A week after I uncovered the original will and the records of his offshore accounts, I returned to my apartment late at night to find the door ajar. My stomach knotted. Inside, the place had been torn apart. Drawers yanked open, cushions, slashed files scattered like debris after a storm. I dropped to my knees, frantically searching for the folder I kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was gone. My heart pounded, but when I turned, a single sheet of paper sat on my kitchen counter, neatly folded. On it, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "You think you can beat me. You'll end up in prison before I ever will." The next morning, 2 police officers knocked on my door. Their tone was clipped hostile, and they carried a warrant. "Rebecca Johnson, you are under suspicion of embezzlement and theft of corporate documents from Johnson Properties." My throat went dry as they stepped inside, searching through what little remained. They found nothing, but one officer smirked as he handed me a summons. I could see it in their eyes. They were doing Charles's bidding. He had connections everywhere, people he could pay or pressure. He wasn't just trying to intimidate me now. He was trying to brand me as the criminal. I called Daniel immediately, panic rising in my chest. He met me within the hour, his jaw clenched as he read the documents. "He planted this," he said, slamming the papers onto my table. "This is a setup designed to discredit you before you can reveal the truth. If he makes the board believe you're a thief, your evidence won't matter." Julia joined us soon after, her face pale but her voice sharp. "Rebecca, he's scared. If he's resorting to this, it means he knows you're close to exposing him. That's why he's striking first." It was true. My father's trap nearly worked. My name could be dragged through the mud, my credibility shredded before I ever got a chance to speak. But as I sat there staring at the false accusations, something inside me hardened. For years they had gaslit me, undermined me, and now they were trying to brand me as the villain in the empire I had built with my grandfather. No more. I lifted my eyes to Daniel and Julia. "Then we don't wait. We take everything public. Not whispers, not behind closed doors. We bring the evidence to the board, to the regulators in one strike. If he wants war, then we give him war." Daniel's lips curved into the first real smile I'd seen on him in weeks. "Then we'll prepare the battlefield." That night, as the city lights flickered outside my window, I realized Charles had made his fatal mistake. By trying to break me through humiliation and intimidation, he had stripped away everything that once made me hesitate. I had nothing left to lose, and a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous enemy of all. The day of the board meeting dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the city as if even the weather knew something was about to break. Daniel and Julia met me outside the Johnson Properties headquarters, their faces taut with determination. In my hands, I carried a leather portfolio filled with every weapon my grandfather had left me, the original will, the documents exposing Charles's offshore accounts, his handwritten notes about protecting me, and the flash drive containing my father's threats. It felt like carrying the weight of justice itself. As we entered the boardroom, conversations hushed. The room was filled with polished oak portraits of past leaders and the heavy stench of money and power. Charles sat at the head of the table in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression smug. Michael lounging beside him like a prince waiting for coronation. Patricia stood in the corner, her pearls gleaming, eyes narrowed on me with quiet malice. "You don't belong here," Charles said, his voice booming across the room. "This meeting is for board members only. Security, sit down!" Daniel cut him off, his tone like steel. "We have legal authority to be here, and if you interfere, you'll add obstruction to your list of crimes." Murmurs rippled through the board. Charles's smile faltered for just a moment. I stepped forward, my voice trembling at first, but growing steadier with each word. "You told me I was erased, that I didn't matter. But my grandfather left me more than memories. He left me the truth, and today I'm putting that truth in front of all of you." I laid the original will on the table, signed and notarized, naming me the sole heir. Gasps filled the room. A board member leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "But this isn't what we were shown last month." "Because what you were shown was forged," I said, my voice sharper now. "My father forced Henry Johnson on his deathbed to sign a fraudulent document under duress." Charles barked a laugh, though his eyes flickered with unease. "Lies. Desperate lies from a bitter daughter. Then let's hear it from your own mouth, I said, sliding the flash drive into the projector. The speakers crackled, and suddenly his voice filled the room. Sign this will or I'll bury her. I'll fabricate scandals, destroy Rebecca until she's nothing. Then Henry's weak reply. She's the only one fit to lead, and you know it. The room went dead silent. Every face turned to Charles, whose smile had frozen into something brittle. He tried to speak, but Julia was already distributing copies of the offshore records. For years, she announced her voice-clear Charles has been funneling millions into offshore accounts. Money stolen from this very company. I pulled out my grandfather's handwritten notes, holding them high. He knew this day would come. He wrote it down himself. Charles is trying to break Rebecca. He cannot be trusted with the company. You all called him a visionary. Do you really think his vision was wrong when he saw through his own son? Michael stood abruptly, his face red. This is a setup. You've been plotting this for years. His voice cracked with panic. The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered, She has the documents, Michael. This isn't a setup. This is evidence. Charles slammed his fist on the table. None of this will stand. I am CEO. You hear me? I run this company. His voice shook rage, bubbling over. And then the doors opened. 2 men and a woman in dark suits strode in, badges flashing. The lead agent's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Charles Johnson, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and coercion. Step away from the table. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. He sputtered, tried to rise, but the agents were already on him, pulling his arms behind his back, snapping cuffs over his wrists. Gasps erupted around the table. Patricia rushed forward, clutching his arm. This is a mistake. You can't take him like this. The agent's reply was flat. We have everything we need. He's going with us. Michael stumbled backward, pale, muttering, I didn't know. I didn't know. His bravado was gone, replaced by the realization that the empire he thought was his had just crumbled into dust. I stood tall, my chest heaving with the weight of vindication. For years, I had been silenced, dismissed, humiliated. But now, in the very room where they tried to erase me, I stood with the truth burning bright in my hands. I met every board member's gaze and said, Henry Johnson built this company on vision and integrity. He chose me to continue that legacy, and I intend to honor him. If you believe in the truth, then you will stand with me. One by one, they nodded. A vote was called. The decision was unanimous. I was reinstated as rightful CEO of Johnson Properties. As Charles was led away in handcuffs, his eyes locked on mine, filled with venom. This isn't over, he spat, but for once I smiled. Yes, it is. The doors closed behind him and the weight of generations lifted from my shoulders. I had fought, I had bled, I had been dragged across the floor by my own father, but I had risen. And in rising, I had torn down the walls of deceit they had built around me. The silence that followed my father's arrest was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the suffocating silence of fear or the hollow quiet that haunted my childhood dinners. This silence felt like oxygen filling a room that had long been starved. For the first time, the board looked at me not as an outcast, not as the scapegoat my family painted me to be, but as the leader my grandfather always knew I could become. The weeks that followed moved swiftly, though every step carried the weight of years of pain. The fraudulent will was declared null and void in court, Henry Johnson's original testament reinstated. The judge's gavel struck down with finality, echoing through the chamber like the closing of a dark chapter. Johnson Properties, every share and asset my grandfather had left behind, returned to me. Charles faced the justice he had long escaped. The embezzlement files, the offshore accounts, the recorded threats, they sealed his fate. Headlines splashed across financial papers, CEO arrested for fraud and coercion. The man who once towered over me with absolute control now sat in a cell stripped of his empire, reduced to a criminal in a cheap jumpsuit. Patricia, my mother, avoided prison but could not escape disgrace. Her social circle evaporated, the country clubs and charity boards turning their backs. She called me once, her voice trembling, asking if I could forgive her. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the old pull of guilt. I answered simply, no. then I hung up. Michael crumbled under the weight of scandal. The bank accounts Charles funneled money into were frozen, his trust fund drained. His swagger, his smirk, they vanished when he realized there was no inheritance left to cushion his fall. He fled the city muttering about rebuilding, but I knew he was broken. Without my father's shadow shielding him, Michael was nothing but a spoiled man-child with no empire to inherit. And then there was me. I stepped into the CEO's office for the first time, my grandfather's chair behind the desk. The room smelled of leather and cedar, the faintest trace of his cologne lingering in the wood. I rested my hands on the armrests and whispered, "I did it, grandfather." Tears slid down my cheeks, but they were not tears of despair. They were the kind that wash wounds clean. Under my leadership, Johnson Properties shifted back to the vision Henry had instilled. We cut ties with the corrupt contracts Charles had built, reinvested in sustainable shipping, opened scholarships for young women in business. Every decision was both a business move and a tribute. The board respected me not just because the law said they had to, but because I proved I could rebuild from ashes stronger than before. But the victory wasn't only corporate, it was personal. I had faced the humiliation of being dragged by my hair across marble floors, of being told I was nothing, of being gaslit until I doubted my own worth. And yet I stood taller than the men and women who tried to erase me. Their betrayal didn't break me, it forged me. One evening, standing in the boardroom's glass tower, as the city lights stretched like constellations below, I felt the weight of the past lift. Justice had been served not only in courts and contracts, but in the very air I breathed. I had reclaimed what was mine, but more importantly, I had reclaimed myself. For the first time in decades, the Johnson legacy wasn't poisoned by lies. It was guided by truth, and it was mine to protect. When the chaos finally settled and the headlines shifted to the next scandal, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment with nothing but the hum of the city outside my window. The leather portfolio still rested on my coffee table, its corners worn from the battles it had carried me through. I could have locked it away in a vault, but instead I left it open as a reminder that the truth is only powerless when hidden. I thought about the nights when I questioned my sanity, when my father's voice had bent reality until I believed I was weak, unworthy, unfit. That was his greatest weapon, gaslighting me into silence. And I realized something important. The bruises from being dragged across marble floors healed, but the wounds from years of being told I was nothing cut deeper. Toxic families don't just take your money or your home. They take your sense of self little by little until you no longer recognize the person staring back in the mirror. But my grandfather had planted seeds of strength in me long before my father tried to bury me. He taught me that integrity matters more than power, that resilience is forged in storms, and that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of surrender. Those lessons rose up in me when I was at my lowest. They became my anchor when the people who should have loved me most tried to sink me. For anyone listening who has been told they are worthless by the very people meant to protect them, hear me when I say this. You are not what their cruelty claims. You are not the sum of their betrayals. You are not defined by their refusal to see your worth. You carry your own light, and even if they try to snuff it out, even if they drag you by your hair into the dirt, that light can burn brighter than their darkness. I know many of you watching are in your 50s, 60s, older. Maybe you've lived through decades of being overlooked, dismissed, gaslit by family or partners or people in power. Maybe you think it's too late to fight back, too late to reclaim what's yours. But I'm here living proof to tell you it's not. My grandfather left me a fortune, yes, but the real inheritance was his belief that I could rise even when everyone else wanted me broken. That kind of inheritance, the one made of courage and grit, is something we all carry. I once believed family meant loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Now I understand that sometimes family is chosen, not given. Daniel, Julia, they became my true family in the darkest moments. Not because of blood, but because of trust, respect, and unwavering belief. When I look back now, I don't see just betrayal and humiliation. I see a crucible that reshaped me. I see a story that began with me being dragged out of my own home and ended with me walking back into the boardroom as the rightful heir. I see the arc of a woman who refused to stay silent, who clawed her way out of the shadows and into the light. And I promise you this, no matter your age, no matter your scars, you can do the same. Standing here now, I no longer carry the weight of my father's hands in my hair or the sting of being thrown out of the home I grew up in. What I carry instead is the knowledge that I am stronger than the worst thing that ever happened to me. My family tried to erase me to convince me I was nothing, but I proved them wrong. I turned their betrayal into the very fire that forged my strength. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are never too broken, never too old, and never too powerless to fight back. Betrayal may leave scars, but scars are proof that you survived. And survival is where strength begins. I know many of you out there have your own battles with toxic parents, greedy siblings, or spouses who tried to dim your light. Maybe you've been told you don't belong, that you're not good enough, that your time has passed. Don't believe those lies. If my father's downfall taught me anything, it's that truth always rises, and those who build their lives on cruelty eventually collapse under the weight of their own deceit. My journey wasn't just about reclaiming a company or a fortune. It was about reclaiming myself. And if I can do it after being dragged across marble floors, disinherited, humiliated, and gaslit, then so can you. The real revenge isn't in seeing them fall, it's in watching yourself rise higher than they ever dreamed you could. So I'll leave you with this. Blood may tie you to people, but love, trust, and respect are what make a family. Build your own, even if it doesn't look like the one you were born into. Choose people who see your worth, who lift you up, who fight beside you when the world tries to drag you down. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now as you listen to my story? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and if my journey spoke to you, if it reminded you that you too can rise from betrayal, then please, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over. Because in the end, the greatest revenge is not destruction. The greatest revenge is becoming the person they told you you could never be.